I was minutes into reviewing the overnight feed when my phone lit up with a message I will remember for a long time. Americans were hit. Confirmed casualties. Multiple installations. I have flown combat missions, I have briefed strike packages, and I am telling you now, before a single weapon system, that what the United States military did in response is going to be studied for years, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is going to spend whatever time they have left wishing they had made a different decision that night. Stay with me through this one, because I am going to walk you through exactly what happened, in the order it happened, and by the end you will understand something most coverage online is completely missing about where this war goes next. It is July of 2026, and what I am describing is not a training exercise, not a warning shot, and not a political statement dressed up as a military operation. It is the United States answering a deliberate attack on its own people with a response so overwhelming, so precise, and so devastatingly complete that it changed the entire trajectory of this conflict inside a single night. Roughly 18 hours before the retaliatory strike I am about to walk you through, ballistic missiles and swarms of Shahed drones launched simultaneously from western and southwestern Iran, targeting American installations in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan at once. This was not a heat-of-the-moment reaction. It was pre-planned, coordinated, synchronized down to the minute, with ballistic missiles arriving on a high arc alongside drones creeping in low from different directions, specifically built to overwhelm American air defense and force the Patriot batteries into an impossible choice about which threats to engage. That is the doctrine the IRGC has spent years building, studying American defenses the way a burglar studies a house alarm. And on this night, it partially worked. Not everything got intercepted, and American service members paid the price for that gap. I want you to sit with that for a second before we go further, because it is easy to talk through target sets and weapons platforms and lose the human center of this story. These were young men and women who volunteered to serve, who deployed into one of the most dangerous stretches of real estate on the planet, and who did not come home the way their families expected. That is what the IRGC decided the moment they loaded those coordinates into their guidance systems. And if you want to understand why the American response was built the way it was built, you have to start right there. Now let me tell you why the IRGC actually launched this attack, because the motive reveals something important. For 13 straight nights before this, the most sustained precision air campaign this theater had seen was methodically taking apart the IRGC's military architecture piece by piece. Their coastal defense grid along the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz was already comprehensively degraded. Their radar network, the eyes that let them see their own airspace, had been burned down installation by installation. Their ballistic missile storage sites, the underground complexes carved into hillsides that were supposed to survive anything short of a direct hit, had been turned into craters. Their dispersed drone tunnels, the ones commanders loved flexing on state television, had been located and destroyed one by one. Their command infrastructure, the headquarters and communications nodes that let generals actually direct operations, had been struck night after night. What was happening to the IRGC in those 13 nights was not a back-and-forth exchange. It was a systematic dismantling of an organization's ability to function, and watching your life's work vaporize on satellite imagery, you cannot stop, produces a moment of pure cornered desperation, and cornered, desperate organizations make catastrophic decisions. Attacking American troops was that decision, and it handed the United States every justification it needed to shift from calibrated degradation into decisive, unrestrained destruction. Let me walk you through the specific units and weapons the IRGC used, because the intelligence picture here shows just how sophisticated and how desperate this operation actually was at once. The primary launch elements were IRGC aerospace units running mobile launch platforms, the exact systems the IRGC has spent this entire war trying to protect by constantly relocating them into civilian terrain. The missiles used were assessed as Fate-class short-range weapons combined with Zulfikar medium-range variants, both road-mobile. The drone element was Shahed 136 loitering munitions working with Mohajer 6 reconnaissance drones acting as forward spotters, feeding terminal guidance corrections back in real time. And here is the detail that genuinely alarmed me. Intelligence sources indicated that updated targeting coordinates for American installations were being fed to IRGC crews in something close to real time from an external source, with precision noticeably better than the IRGC's own organic capability could explain on its own. I will come back to that thread later, because where it leads is genuinely unsettling. For now, hold on to this. The attack was sophisticated, pre-planned, and appears to have had outside help. Every piece of that equation was about to receive an answer. The retaliatory package Central Command, assembled in the hours after the attack, was, by every measure that matters, the most complex, most lethal, most surgically targeted, coordinated air operation this theater had seen since the war began, and it reflected weeks of quiet intelligence preparation simply waiting for a trigger. 6 separate target sets were struck simultaneously across 4 Iranian provinces, each one chosen specifically because of its direct connection to the units that planned and carried out the attack on American troops. This was not indiscriminate retaliation against whatever was convenient. This was a forensic, intelligence-driven strike tracing the attack backward to its origin, the headquarters that issued the order, the communications nodes that relayed it, the missile brigades that executed it, the storage facilities that housed the weapons, and the launch sites used. All of it was hit at once, in a window built to prevent dispersal, evacuation, or survival of the people and infrastructure responsible. This was systematically removing the hand that threw the punch. Now let me walk you through what this package actually looked like in the air, because tactically, this is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. Leading the formation were F-16CJ Wild Weasels, flying one of the most dangerous missions in modern air warfare, going in first to blind the enemy before anyone else enters the threat envelope. They carry the AN/ASQ 213 harm targeting system, which hunts radar emissions across a broad spectrum, pinpoints their location, and cues AGM-88 harm missiles that ride the beam back to its source. The moment an Iranian operator switches on his search radar, that becomes the last decision that radar system ever makes. This happens in seconds, and the entire time those pilots sit inside the threat envelope of the very systems they are hunting, absorbing the risk personally so everything behind them can operate unengaged. Once the Wild Weasels tore holes in the radar picture, the F-35S moved in, and what an F-35 contributes goes far beyond dropping bombs. Its sensor fusion means it is simultaneously processing its own radar and electronic warfare suite while pulling in data from satellites overhead, from MQ-9 Reapers running ISR, from Aegis systems on Navy ships in the Gulf, and from airborne early warning aircraft working the picture from standoff range, all fed back out to every other aircraft as an updated targeting picture. In a strike like this, the F-35 is the cognitive center of the whole operation, welding individual aircraft into one coherent system that thinks and reacts as a single organism. That kind of networked capability is something none of America's current adversaries can replicate. Not the IRGC, not Russia, not China, and the IRGC felt every bit of that advantage this night. The F-18 Super Hornets off the carrier were carrying air-launched cruise missiles with roughly 1,000 pounds of warhead each, terrain following, with standoff range keeping the launching aircraft outside the reach of whatever surface-to-air systems the IRGC still had operational. That warhead navigates at low altitude through the same terrain masking the IRGC thought was protecting its dispersed missile sites, because Iranian radar simply cannot track it through mountains and valleys. They built their defensive doctrine around that terrain, and it became the exact medium the cruise missiles used to reach them. And then comes the part that makes this operation historically significant. With radar suppressed, the targeting network running, and outer missile defense cleared, the B-2 Spirit arrived, carrying GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, 30,000-pound bunker busters built for exactly one purpose, to reach things buried deep underground and destroy them completely. The GBU-57 penetrates to extraordinary depth before detonating, and the physics inside an enclosed underground structure at that point are genuinely catastrophic. The pressure wave, the structural collapse, the heat. Nothing built to withstand conventional attack survives a GBU-57 at design depth. The primary target was the underground IRGC Regional Command Center Intelligence, assessed as the nerve center for the units responsible for the attack. The secondary explosions, stored ammunition cooking off, propellant from stockpiled missiles igniting in sequence, were visible for miles and burned for hours. That was not simply a command center being struck. That was a command center ceasing to function at all. There is something else in this package worth your attention, because it represents a genuine evolution in how modern air campaigns are fought. Autonomous, AI-enabled collaborative aircraft operated ahead of the manned formation, running continuous tracking against mobile IRGC assets trying to relocate as the package approached. Historically, relocating fast has been an effective survival tactic. A mobile system sitting somewhere other than its last known location is much harder to hit. But with autonomous systems continuously updating target positions and feeding those updates straight into the network, mobile assets simply cannot move fast enough to escape the targeting cycle anymore. Multiple IRGC mobile command vehicles and launch platforms were struck this night while actively relocating, caught mid-movement and taken out before reaching a new hide position. That capability did not exist 5 years ago. Let me give you the honest accounting. because analysis only means something if it is honest about both sides. The IRGC has been absorbing the most sustained air campaign it has ever faced. Its coastal defense network is severely degraded. Its radar coverage is effectively blind across multiple sectors. Its ballistic missile inventory has been meaningfully reduced. Its drone production and underground storage network have been systematically struck. Its regional command infrastructure has taken catastrophic losses. But Iran is a massive country, and the IRGC still numbers in the hundreds of thousands. Intelligence estimates place its remaining ballistic missile inventory between 1,500 and 2,000 rounds, accounting for both pre-conflict stockpiles and everything lost across 13-plus nights of strikes. It still retains some drone production, even as the facilities feeding it get targeted, and it still maintains active proxy networks. The Houthis in Yemen, militia forces inside Iraq, Hezbollah assets across the region. The IRGC is degraded. It is not finished. And a degraded adversary with remaining capability and nothing left to lose is exactly the kind of adversary that requires continued, escalating pressure rather than an off-ramp that lets it rebuild. This is where I have to bring in the Russia angle, carefully, because if this reporting is accurate, the implications reach far beyond this conflict. Intelligence sources have indicated Russian assets have been feeding the IRGC updated targeting data on American installations, real-time satellite-derived coordinates improving IRGC precision beyond what its own capability could produce. If that holds up, it means a permanent member of the UN Security Council has been feeding targeting intelligence to a designated terrorist organization used in an attack that took American lives. That is not just a Middle East story anymore. Russia's logic is not hard to read either. Tying down American attention and resources in the Gulf buys them more freedom of action in Ukraine, a proxy strategy run at the highest level, and I think every lawmaker tracking this conflict needs to be looking at it with considerably harder eyes. A few other things were moving simultaneously that same week worth knowing. Saudi Arabia struck a Yemeni airport being used as a Houthi operational base, after the IRGC reportedly reached out to Houthi command, urging them to threaten the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the alternate choke point shipping uses whenever Hormuz becomes contested. The calculation was that threatening both choke points at once would create enough global economic disruption to shift the conversation in Washington. Saudi Arabia understood that game and moved the moment the activation signal went out. The UAE also committed fighter assets to direct strikes inside Iran that week, an extraordinary escalation signaling the regional coalition backing American operations is broader than the IRGC ever anticipated. The United Kingdom formally designated Iran and the IRGC, a terrorist organization, around the same period, triggering new financial enforcement, new sanctions pathways, and new legal tools against IRGC support networks on British soil. The pressure was not just falling from the sky, it was tightening on every legal and financial front at once. Now let me draw you the strategic picture, because this is what most coverage is genuinely missing. When the IRGC launched those missiles at American troops, they were making a calculation rooted in historical precedent, watching years of American responses to Iranian proxy attacks, and seeing a pattern of calibrated response followed by a search for de-escalation. They concluded that taking American lives would generate enough domestic pressure in Washington to force a pullback, buy the ceasefire they needed to rebuild, and let them return to the table with their core deterrent intact. That calculation was wrong, and the wrongness of it is being written right now into IRGC facilities across 4 provinces in the language of 30,000-pound bombs. The posture out of Washington has been clear and fundamentally different from anything the IRGC has previously navigated, closer to an asymmetric, disproportionate response. Whatever Iran spends on an attack, the American response costs more, degrades more capability, and does not scale back down to match the size of the original action. The exchange ratio here is catastrophically unfavorable for the IRGC at every level. They spend missiles that cost real money and real infrastructure to produce, and in return receive strikes that destroy the storage facilities, the production support, the command elements, and the units that carried the attack out. Every time the IRGC fires, they pay with capability that cannot be quickly replaced. Every time America responds, the IRGC pays again at a multiplied rate, and sustained over months. That ratio is simply not survivable. Here's the second piece most analysts are missing. The IRGC's power inside Iran was never purely military. It is extensively economic, controlling enormous portions of the civilian economy, construction, telecommunications, infrastructure, import and export, energy distribution. That footprint is the actual foundation of its power, how it funds its forces and keeps opposition suppressed through economic dependency. The sustained campaign, combined with the reinstated naval blockade cutting Iranian oil off from China, the new UK terrorism designation, and tightening sanctions enforcement, is eating into that base in ways it cannot quickly recover from. When the economic base weakens, the ability to fund the military weakens with it. And when the military weakens, the ability to suppress domestic opposition weakens right alongside it. And internal dynamics inside Iran become extremely volatile for whatever remains of the leadership. There is a third piece I think is the most strategically important and the least discussed anywhere. Inside Iran right now, there are two dynamics running at once, feeding off each other in a direction the regime cannot fully control. The crackdown on protesters has continued even while American bombs fall on its own infrastructure, and the fact that it has not meaningfully slowed under this level of pressure tells you how brittle domestic control has become, because they are not cracking down out of strength, they are cracking down because stopping would mean admitting the population has real leverage. At the same time, this campaign is dismantling the mythology of IRGC invincibility that has been the psychological foundation of the regime's authority for 4 decades. They spent 40 years telling Iranians that no outside power could touch them, that the IRGC was an unbreakable shield. When the skies light up night after night with explosions they cannot stop, when facilities meant to deter exactly this are turning into visible craters despite censorship, and when untouchable leadership is being targeted in ways the public can see, that mythology cracks, and every serious study of authoritarian regimes under simultaneous external pressure and internal strain shows that kind of collapse is one of the most destabilizing forces a regime can face. There is also a mountain facility question at the center of all this, the last significantly intact piece of nuclear infrastructure not yet struck. Statements out of Washington have been explicit and increasingly specific on timing. The weapon built for that category of target has already proven itself elsewhere in this campaign. The penetration physics have been modeled, the crews have rehearsed it, and the intelligence preparation has run for months. The remaining variable is political, and every signal suggests it is converging toward a decision rather than drifting away from one. When that strike happens, and every operational signal suggests it is a matter of when rather than if, it will likely stand as the single most consequential action of this entire campaign, because it removes the one card the regime has always believed gives it real leverage. A regime without meaningful nuclear leverage, without significant conventional capability, without a functioning economic base, and without domestic legitimacy, is a regime entering the final phase of its existence, whatever that final phase ultimately looks like. And here's the point I want to leave you with, because I think it ties this whole story together. The IRGC gambled that taking American lives would create political space by generating enough domestic pressure in the United States to force a pullback. What it actually created was the exact conditions for the most comprehensive, most justified escalation this theater has witnessed in the entire war. The American public does not absorb an attack on its own service members and respond by calling for retreat. The American military does not take a hit like that and quietly go searching for a diplomatic off-ramp. The response is precisely what I just walked you through. More platforms, more weapons, more precision, and a level of destruction that goes far beyond what a single night of retaliation would normally look like. Every surviving IRGC commander needs to understand this clearly. The attack did not buy Iran time, did not create diplomatic leverage, and did not generate the political pressure they were counting on. What it did was remove the last shred of hesitation about how much pressure was appropriate going forward, and the answer the United States military is giving to that question is visible right now in the smoke columns still rising over 4 Iranian provinces. What happens from here comes down to a very specific set of decisions being made right now, in Washington and inside whatever remains of the IRGC's command structure. Does Washington move on the mountain facility in the coming days, or hold it back as leverage for something bigger? Does the IRGC miscalculate again, or does someone finally send a real signal through back channels that they will negotiate on terms that do not preserve their nuclear program and their extortion franchise over Hormuz? Does the Russian involvement escalate into something that forces a direct American response toward Russian assets? Or does Moscow quietly pull back before that attribution becomes undeniable? And does the internal pressure building inside Iran, the protests, the economic collapse, the crumbling mythology, finally reach a tipping point that puts a fundamentally different set of people across the table from Washington? Those are the variables that actually determine how this ends. And from where I am, sitting, every one of them is pointing in the same direction, toward continued escalation and continued degradation, right up until either the regime collapses under its own weight or someone inside it finally accepts terms it has refused for decades. I want to know what you think happens next. Does that mountain facility get struck within days, or does Washington keep holding it back? Has the IRGC miscalculated past the point of political survival? Or do they still have cards left to force an outcome that keeps the regime standing? Drop your honest red in the comments, because the thinking in this community is some of the sharpest I see on this conflict, and it genuinely matters to me. If this gave you a clearer picture of what actually happened, the real mechanics, the real strategy, the real stakes underneath the headline, hit that like button, because it puts grounded analysis in front of people who deserve to understand what their military is doing and why. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this conflict is not slowing down, and neither is my coverage, sourced and calm, not hyped for clicks. Share this with someone trying to make sense of what is happening over there. Stay locked in, stay sharp, and I will see you in the next one the moment the next development breaks.